Some components are just monstrous in the amount of stuff that you can do with them, and Q Button is one of those components. Most of it is really simple, but the amount of breadth we get from this component is just awesome. And Quasar does an awesome job of making everything always look really, really nice for us. Now, one thing I did in this video is I changed my ESLinter from Plugin View Essentials to Plugin View Strongly Recommended, just because that helps me code a little bit faster by doing a little bit of extra formatting for me behind the scenes. So let's go ahead and get this video started. Quasar, new page, and we'll call it Q Button page, but we have to whack it in the components directory. And now if we open up our menu bar, there it is, Q Button page, and we can go ahead and get started. So some of the basics, Q-Button, we'll make this a self-closing tag, as buttons often will be. And then we'll put in here a label that is equal to push me. Save that, and there we go. We've got our push me button. If we want, we can also throw that directly inside of the button. So we can take the text push me out of here, whack it in there, and we get the same result. So that's one good thing to know, that you can put stuff directly inside of the button. Another thing we can do is change the color. So let's set it to primary. And there we go, it changes straight away for us. However, if we change it to something like green-2, notice that the text is a little bit too white against that button. Well, in that case, we can say text-color is equal to gray-9, for example, and it will change the text color so we can easily see that button now. We can also say no-caps, and that's just going to remove the automatic capitalization because by default, all buttons are going to be capitalized. Now, there may be situations where you want a little bit more control over your colors. And in general, it's probably best just to use the color palette that Quasar gives to you. However, if there's situations where you want to use your own colors, just say style and then throw it directly into a style tag. This is totally fine. Some people will think, oh no, CSS sitting inside my components. But these days, it really doesn't matter that much because it's usually just bits here and there. So let's say the background is equal to 2020, make that a hashtag. And that's going to make it sort of a dark grayish background. And I'm going to set the text color here to, this is something I prepared earlier, E693D6. I kind of remember what that color is, so this will be a surprise. Ah, very nice, pink. And by the way, something cool, even though we use the style tag here, if I click on this button, we still end up with a pink ripple. So I don't even know how it does that, but somehow it knows the effect to use for the ripple. It must be based on this color. So I reckon that's pretty cool. All right, let's get rid of that. Maybe move it back to a different color like purple. Yeah, that's how we usually do coloring. Now there's a lot of types of buttons that we can play around with, like flat, and that's going to remove the background. However, when you hover on it, you get a little bit of that color back. So this is really nice if you want a button that isn't too emphasized. We can also say unelevated. And before I do that, let me just cut that, save it. So notice that we've got a bit of a shadow here that makes the button look like it's elevated a bit. Unelevated is just going to remove that shadow. So I do this sometimes if I feel like the page is getting a bit overwhelmed by buttons. We can also say outline, gives it an outline button. So you might want to use that. Glossy, which I usually absolutely hate, but there are some situations where it's nice to have a glossy button. And also push. I really like push if there's a button that I want to draw a lot of attention to, or if it does a really big action. So for example, if there's an Ajax request, that's kind of like a final request for the entire page. So they've done a whole bunch of setup in a form, for example, and then this button sends that request that does a lot of things. I'll make that a push button, just like a personal preference of mine. And another thing, of course, is we can add icons really easily to the buttons. So let's add a save icon like that. We can also whack it onto the other side. Save. And if I copy that down, we can have an icon on either side. And sometimes you may want the icon and the text to stack. And in order to do that, you use the word stack. And now the icon's going to sit on top of the text. That can be really handy, especially if you don't have a lot of room on the page. We can also make things rounded. So let me get rid of stacked. And if we make the border rounded, It adds a beautiful, nice round feel to it. And so you want to use rounded if there's stuff inside of your button. However, if it's just an icon, then you can use round. But look at what happens if I use round and there's a label. Notice how it kind of messes up. So you only want to use round if there's one thing sitting inside of your button. So let's get rid of the label there, and now it looks good. Or you can get rid of the icon and change the label to just a letter. So for example, L. And that's something that you might see in an app where it's kind of like the Google Phones app where it has contact lists and it's just got the letter on the left side. So this is kind of like an avatar, but it's a button. You can also have your own custom content sitting inside a button. So how am I going to do this? How about we get rid of that for now? We make it so we can have stuff sitting inside of the button. And let's put inside here text. Yeah, so you've already seen something like that. But if we go to our Q avatar component, I can grab this avatar component here and throw it straight into the button like that. And there we go. Now Aang is sitting inside of the button. But in this case, I probably want to remove that styling from the avatar. Yeah, and there we go. You can just throw stuff directly into the button and it still works nicely. Now, avatars have a set size. So that's actually making this image smaller. If we get rid of the avatar part, then it's going to grow to the size of the image. So buttons will grow depending on the content inside them if you throw content directly inside of the button like we have here. We can also add in some text here. How about Aang, because that's his name. And this is probably a classic example where you would want to add stack to the button. Yeah, there we go. So it's pretty cool how we can throw stuff inside of our buttons. Let's bring it back to what we had before. Just something really simple. And moving on. So have a look at this. We're going to put our own content inside of the button, remove the label there, put a div in there and just save that for now. All right, so we've got a blank button and we'll put a class on this div that is ellipsis. That is a really annoying word to spell. And that's a class that Quasar gives us. And now we can put some text in here. Lots of text in here. And to get that ellipsis to kick in, let's say style is equal to width of 70 pixels. And there we go. It's got a set width of 70 pixels, and then we're going to have a few dots at the end there. And honestly, I can't think of a lot of situations where you'd use this. Maybe if you don't have enough room for your button on a mobile device, or if you're using a button, a whole bunch of buttons to show blog posts. So something like that. In fact, a better example would be this. Let's make that a column. Yeah, and you're showing a whole lot of blog posts, but the buttons have a set width of, say, 100 pixels. Yeah, all right. So not the best example, but you get the idea. You've got that ellipsis component, and honestly, it'll probably come in handy in a few other components that you explore as well. So that's good to know. Let's change this to a label, and now we're going to explore align. So align is a pretty straightforward attribute. We can align it to the left, and the text goes to the left. Align it to the right, and this also works well with icons as well. So icon is equal to, how about a train? And if we say around, then everything is going to be equally distributed in the space. So save that. And so the space here, here, and here is equally distributed when we say around. However, if we say between, it puts space between these two elements so that they end up on the edge. I'll show you what I mean. Yeah, so between puts space right in between here so they end up on the edges of the button. That can be really useful to know. So let's go back to normal here by removing the column class. What else? We might get rid of a line and we'll get rid of that label there. And now we're just back to a really basic icon for our button. We have quite a bit of control over the size of our button. So we can say, for example, extra small. I haven't used extra small before, but I have used small before. Medium gives us the normal size of our button. We've also got, of course, large and extra large. So those are definitely worth knowing. We've also got padding as well. So we can come down here. Let's move that back to a medium-sized button. And we can say padding. All of those sizes I just showed you also apply to padding as well. Extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, etc. And so that's going to give us a little bit of a different result. So we have a lot of padding in there and a smaller icon. And you can mess around with these as well. So you could have like a large icon, but a smaller amount of padding, something like that. It's nice to know we have that flexibility with Quasar. I love it. Let's make this green just to mix things up a little bit. And another cool thing with padding, you can actually do the whole thing from scratch. So if you've ever used the padding property with CSS, what it does is it starts with the top, then right, then bottom, then left. So it goes clockwise. So for example, let's have a huge padding at the top of 30 pixels. And then on the right, let's have a small padding of 1 pixel. On the bottom, let's have like, I don't know, a massive padding of 100 pixels. And then on the left, we'll have one of 0 pixels. And that's just a bit of a silly example there, but you get the picture. And another thing that we can do, and I actually didn't know about this until reading the docs recently, is we can use Quasar's default sizes for the y-axis and then the x-axis. I'll show you what I mean. We can say, hey, set the y-axis padding to large and the x-axis padding to small. And then the y-axis is going to be large, so at the top and bottom, and then small on the left and right. So we have all of that flexibility. And it's probably better to do it this way because it means that you're doing it the Quasar way and you're using their sizes. And that's usually a good thing. I'm just going to move things back to normal now. And let's move on to loading. This is really, really cool. I use loading all of the time. If we just say loading there and equal to true, then we get this beautiful loading symbol. And let's actually simulate this. So how about we say @click equals simulate request. And there we go. So we'll set this to a data property that's called loading. And now we'll say data, return an object, loading is equal to false by default. Save that. And we'll come down here, create a new method, call it simulate request. And when this starts, we're going to set the loading equal to true. This.loading is equal to true. So let's see if that works. And it does. And now the easiest way to simulate a request is to just say set timeout. And we'll do 3 seconds here. And then we can just say this.loading is equal to false. So now we click on it. 1, 2, 3, and it's done. How cool is that? I could play with this all day, and I love that you get this beautiful, look at this when it's done. You just get this nice fade out, and they've put in that little bit of extra effort to make it look really beautiful. I like that. But you know what? Quasar's got a lot of its own spinners, so why don't we just go ahead and use one of them? Maybe we don't want to use the default spinner. We can do that by saying, for example, q-spinner-gears. That's one of the spinners that Quasar gives us out of the box, so we can whack that in there. Let's make it self-closing like this. And we actually have to throw this in a template. So template, because this is going to be a slot component for loading. So hashtag, which is basically the same as saying v-slot and then the thing that we want it to be a slot for. So rather than doing that, I can just say hashtag loading. And now when I click on it, we get the gears for loading. How cool is that? And there's actually quite a few that Quasar gives us out of the box, like radio. Oh, you got to refresh the page when you do slotting stuff sometimes. So we got radio, and we also have hourglass. I like this one. Oh, refresh the page. Yeah, the hourglass loader. But let's move it back to the normal spinner for now. Refresh the page, and we're back to normal. And now you're probably thinking it doesn't get any better than that, but it does. We can actually set the progress as well. I'll show you what I mean. We can say percentage is equal to, what's a good starting point? Let's say 0%, and you'll notice that it doesn't show anything there. In fact, I'll set loading to true so that we can play around with this more easily. But if I set it to 20, then it's 20% done. If I set it to 50, and so on and so forth. How cool is that? So we can actually set this percentage of how much it is completed. And let's actually mock this so we can see what it looks like. We'll set that to progress, we'll come in here and we'll set progress to 0 by default and simulate request. When it starts, we'll say this.progress is equal to, let's set it to 0. And then we'll say set timeout. Whoop, gone a bit crazy with my formatting there. And how about every 1 second? And we'll make it a total of 5 seconds. Probably best if I make this a one-liner because I'm going to do a bit of copying down. And then we can say this.progress plus equals 20. Okay, so after 1 second, we're going to add 20 to progress, and we're going to do that 5 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Save that. Okay, refresh the page, and I'm going to come in here and move this back to the loading variable that we have, and check this out. Oh, I've done something wrong. So 1 second, and then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. Let's try this again. And there we go. 2, 3, 4, 5. And we get this awesome loading bar. So you can imagine how that would come in handy if you're able to get some feedback. For example, if you're running a job in the background and it sends a request, or like pushes a request down to your application that tells you how far along that job is done. That could be like super handy to have a loading bar, a progress bar there. And of course, Quasar makes it a cinch. Actually, let's leave that there. You might want it for reference. So coming back up here, let's move on to ripples because we have a little bit of control over the ripple, which is that, let me just move these off. So the ripple is that little sort of, that little effect you get when you press the button. You notice that there's a little circle thing that kind of emanates from the place that you click. And notice if I click on the top right corner, it emanates from where my mouse is, bottom left. You might want to do this on your own computer to really see that that's happening. It's a very specific thing. However, we actually have a little bit of control over that. If we say ripple and we set that to an object, we can say do it from the center. And now when I click on it, even if I go from the edge, it's going to start in the center. So that's really cool to know. Another thing we can do is change the color of the ripple. So let's set that to orange. And now it's an orange ripple. That probably looks better if you don't have a color there. Yeah, orange ripple. Let's bring the color back, get rid of that color. And the last thing we can do is just get rid of the ripple entirely. So now clicking on that button doesn't give us the ripple effect. Sad face, so I'm going to get rid of this and bring the ripple back. That's ripples. Another thing that you'll want to do all the time is link to different parts of your app with a button. And we can just say to, just like you would with View Router, and then save that. And now when we click on this button, it'll take us to the home page. There we go, it works. Let's take us to the avatar page. And it works. And another thing we can do, and I didn't even know this till recently, is at click, go to home, for example. We'll change that to home. You can actually hijack the clicking of to. I'll show you what I mean. Sometimes you might want to do this. I've never been in a situation where I have, but you might think of one. We can say go to home, take in the event, and take in a function called go. So basically, if we call this, it's then going to activate that link. So it's actually going to take us to that location if we call go. And now what we can do is say event.navigate and set that equal to false. So now when we click on this button, it doesn't navigate there, which means we have control over the navigation. And we can say, for example, set timeout. It's so good, for example, set timeout. We can just say after 2 seconds, then call go, which is then going to take us to the link. So 1, 2, and there we are. I've never used this myself. I only just found out it was a thing, but it's cool to know that we can do that if we like. Come back up here, remove that. What else can we do? This is good to know. Now, if I open up the console here and we inspect this, let's scroll up a little bit. Yeah, notice that the type is equal to button in this scenario. We can actually change that. So maybe, for example, you want this button to work like a button inside of a form. So sometimes you have a button in a form, you click on that button and it submits the form. And maybe you want to do that in a native way. So let me give you an example here. If I throw this button inside of this form, you would expect that when I press that button, because it's inside a form, that it would submit to the page. Let's remove the to part here. Or let's just imagine a scenario where you want it to then submit to the page. And usually you would say type is equal to submit to do that. Well, that works with Q button. So if I save this, click on the button, it's now submitting the page. So that isn't like the most complete example, but you get the idea. You can use this button in a native form if you would like to. And maybe you want your button to act like a normal link. So you don't want to use it like view router. You can set the type to A, and then we can say href instead of saying to, and I don't know, google.com. Save it, and it'll take you to Google. Oh, actually, that's thrown it onto the end of my current server because I didn't add the HTTPS. And then that'll take me to google.com. There we go. Pretty cool. And then maybe you want to open this in a different tab. In fact, let's not use Google here. Let's use quasar.dev. And now what I can do is say target is equal to underscore blank. So when I click on this link, open it inside of a blank tab. So now let's get rid of the console. We probably don't need that for now. There we go. It opens it in a blank tab. So that can be useful if you want people to keep the app open. And this is just an external link, like some extra information outside of your website that you might want them to look at. And then, of course, if I remove that, it'll take me straight to Quasar within the same tab. Really good to know. Pressing on. There are situations where you might want a Fab button, which is short for floating action button. And to do that, we can just type in the word Fab. Oh, let me just bring this icon back. And let's change the color to keep things interesting. Yeah, if I use the word Fab here for floating action button, then it automatically does all of the styling for a traditional floating action button, as Google would define it in its material design spec. And now we can change this icon to something like add, because often you'll have like a little button down here for adding things. And in fact, let me show you a complete example here. Q-page-sticky is a really awesome component that we have, and that's basically going to allow us to stick things within a Q page. I'll show you what I mean. Let's set the position equal to bottom right, and I'll throw the button in there. And then it just goes straight down there. And we can also say, for example, offset and give that an array and maybe set it to 16 by 16, and it just sort of pushes it out a little bit and gives it an offset. And you'll often see this. This is really handy when you have a mobile app and you're constantly adding things. It's nice to have that add button right near the user's thumb. And so we can do that easily using Q-page-sticky and a floating action button. Moving on. Oh, before I move on, if we add dash mini, we get a mini floating action button. That's good to know. So let me just get rid of the sticky part. Bring us back to where we were before, get rid of that, and now we're back to a normal button. Now, sometimes we end up in situations where we need to squeeze buttons so they fit in tiny places. In my experience, this is especially true for tables that have buttons in them. So often I have tables and like there's a button at the right side of the table, and I don't want the whole table to be really big, like to have the size of this button. I want the whole table to be dense. And I can easily do that by adding the dense attribute to our button. And that just makes everything a little bit denser. So that's really good to know. You can also get a similar achievement with padding. However, dense is a kind of a more standardized way of making your button dense. Now, Q button isn't a wrapper for router link. So this is not sitting inside of a router link component behind the scenes. And the reason I say that is because you might think that it does because it's got the to attribute, for example. And what that means is that it can't do everything that router link can do unless we wrap it in router link ourselves. All right, so this is probably an unusual thing, like you wouldn't do it very often, but it's good to know that it's possible. So let's go ahead and wrap this inside of router link. And we can say v-slot is equal to props. And now we can take these props and use them within our button. So basically we have the power of router link inside of our button. I'll show you what I mean. We'll say v-bind, and we'll use a function called button props. So we're going to get some button props, and we'll pass that the router link props. I'm going to set the label of this to home. Label is equal to home. Save that. And we're going to have to go ahead and create this method as well. Voila. Now, one of the things that we can pull out of router link is exact active. And that's going to tell us if the route that we're currently on is equal to the to property of the link. I'll give you an example. So let's say to is equal to /, so our home route. If we are on the home route, then is exact active will be true because we are exactly on that route. We can also say is active to test whether or not we are within that route. But in this example, we'll say is exact active. Now what I'm going to do is return an object, and this is going to hold the attributes of our button. So let's set the color equal to is exact active. That'll be a ternary operator. And so if that is true, if we are on the current route for this button, we'll make it red. Otherwise, undefined, which will basically just set it back to normal. Let's see if I can spell undefined. All right, so save that. Scrolling up. Let's get rid of the color property there because we're now doing that ourselves using vbind. Save it. And now notice that it is not red. However, if we set to the button route, then it will be red. And if you don't understand this, that's totally fine. This is more view router stuff. And so if you want to learn about view router, that's a different concept. It's something that we're not going to cover in depth in this video. I just wanted to give this example for those of you that do understand view router. Moving on. Let's bring things back to normal. I'm just going to bust out a few other things that we can do with a button now. So you'll often want a tooltip. Let's say here, Q-button to close that off. And inside it, we'll say Q-tooltip. Whoop, didn't finish writing that word. There we go. My tooltip. Oh, let's do something funny. Don't press the red button. Bit of a Men in Black reference there. Whoops. Color is equal to red. Save that. Don't press the red button. So that's pretty cool. Get rid of that, and I'll show you another example. We can set it to disabled. And this is particularly useful. Oh, that's disabled without a D. This is particularly useful if you're doing a request. So you probably do not want the button to be clicked again whilst there is a request happening. I've actually had this situation where I wasn't forward thinking enough to add disable. And so clients would be like whacking that button over and over again because they had slow internet. And then you end up with a bunch of requests and it's like, ah! So what we can do is just disable that. And I'll give you an example here. Handle clicked. And we'll add that method in here, and we'll just do a console.log saying clicked, open up the console. And now when I click on that, notice that it doesn't console.log anything. However, if I remove disabled, I can now click on the button, which is really cool. Quasar's handled disabling the button and adding a little bit of extra styling there. So notice that it goes a little bit lighter. Save it. Yeah, a little bit more transparent to show you that it is disabled. That's really handy, especially for requests. We also have a property called no wrap, and I'll show you what that does. Let's say the label is quite long, so take me home, please. I've had enough of this site. Let's set a width for that to 100 pixels. And there we go. It's going to make the button really, really high. And perhaps for some reason, you want to have no wrap on that button. This probably isn't the best example, but it's good to know that we have that option available to us. And if you can think of a better example for using no wrap, then let me know in the comments. If comments are available yet, I haven't actually built it out for the site, but it'll be coming soon. Let's go back to something a little bit more normal. Now, I had a bit of difficulty showing you an example for this next thing, and that is the stretch property. And what this means is you can tell this button to stretch and fill up all the space inside of a Flexbox parent. I'll give you an example. Let's add a div in here, and we'll throw the button in there. And this div is going to have a class that is equal to row, we'll say items dash start. And you know what? Let's give it a height as well. So the height will be equal to 100 pixels. There we go. And notice that that has stretched now to fill in all the space. However, if I remove that, it's going to move back to normal. And a situation you might use this, maybe you've got like a bunch of buttons or other things in here, and you only want the button to stretch to fill the space. This is another one of those things where if you can think of a better example for this, then let me know, because this example isn't great, but you get the idea of what it does now. Moving back to what we had before, just a plain old button. And that's it for this video. But one more thing I'm going to show you is a pattern that I often use with buttons, just so you can kind of see it in action in a more real world example. I will often have a logout button. So let's set the icon here equal to logout. There we go. Luckily, we have that icon. And we can say round. And I'm going to make this flat. And I'll throw this button up into the top right here. So let's copy that. And we'll jump into our main layout. And let's come up here a little bit. Where's our bar? So here's our toolbar. We can throw it after the title. And there we go, it shows up there. This is a pattern that I often use for a button for just logging out of the application. And while we're at it, let's change it from Quasar app to Quasar components. A little bit more indicative of what this application is. So there we go. That is the Q-button component. And I'm pretty sure I showed you everything that you can do with its API in this video. Hope you enjoyed it. It was a long one, but I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore a little bit of other button stuff, because there's actually some cool button stuff that you can do when you add it to different contexts. So we can group buttons really nicely and have like button drop downs and stuff like that. And then we'll move on to something else, but it'll be fun and really useful. So I hope you enjoy it. See you in the next video.